the great chamber filled with voices from a dozen different worlds. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered around the massive circular table, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some walked on 4 legs, others floated in the air. A few needed special tanks filled with methane gas to survive in the meeting room. Ambassador Zektar stood tall on his 6 legs, his hard shell gleaming under the bright lights. His species ruled over 40 star systems and commanded the largest fleet in this part of the galaxy. Today, he had important business to discuss with the Galactic Council. "My fellow council members," Zektar began, his voice echoing through the chamber. "We face a growing problem in the outer sectors. The humans continue to build new colonies where they should not be. Their ships move freely through space that belongs to us." Murmurs of agreement came from several other representatives. The Hegemony Coalition controlled the richest mining worlds in the galaxy. They did not like competition from anyone, especially not from a species as young as humanity. "These humans dare to establish settlements in the Kepler sector," Zektar continued, waving one of his clawed arms at the star map floating above the table. "Our mining operations there produce the rare metals needed for our fleets. We cannot allow this interference to continue." Commander Ralk of the Predator caste leaned forward in his chair. His reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. "The solution seems obvious, Zektar. Send a fleet to remove them." "Exactly my thoughts," Zektar replied. "A show of force should make them understand their place in the galaxy." From across the chamber, a soft voice spoke up. Elder Vashati, one of the oldest beings in known space, raised her crystalline hand. Her species had lived for thousands of years and remembered events that others had forgotten. "You speak of dangerous things, young Zektar," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless centuries. "There are laws older than your civilization, laws written in blood and fire." Several representatives turned to look at the ancient being. Her crystal body pulsed with a dim, worried light. "What laws?" Zektar demanded, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "We follow the Galactic Code. No species may claim territory without proper authorization from this council." "There is another law," Vashati continued, her voice growing stronger. "One that exists beyond written codes. It says clearly, never make humans angry, never push them too far." Laughter erupted from several seats around the table. Commander Ralk's deep roar mixed with the high-pitched chittering of the insect-like swarm delegates. "With respect, Elder, that sounds like an old story told to scare children," said Representative Qualm of the Trade Federation. "Humans are a young species. They have been in space for barely 300 years. Their military is small and scattered, across dozens of worlds." "Their technology is inferior," added another voice. "Their ships are slower than ours. Their weapons are less advanced." Zektar nodded in agreement. "The humans have perhaps 50 military vessels in their entire fleet. We have over 2,000 ships in the coalition alone. What could they possibly do to threaten us?" Elder Vashati's crystal form dimmed with sadness. "You know nothing of their history. 300 years ago, there was a war. A terrible war that lasted for 20 years. When it ended, the surviving races begged the humans to limit their military. We offered them anything they wanted if they would just stop fighting." "Old stories," Ralk said, with a dismissive wave. "Even if they were true, that was long ago. Today's humans are soft. They spend their time growing food and building cities. They avoid conflict whenever possible." "Yes," Vashati whispered. "They avoid conflict. But what happens when conflict finds them?" Meanwhile, far from the council chamber, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his office on the human colony of New Denver. The middle-aged officer had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 25 years. His face showed the lines that came from watching over settlements on the edge of civilized space. A soft chime indicated an incoming message marked with the highest security codes. Jake's expression grew serious as he read the transmission from the Galactic Council. The words were polite, but their meaning was clear. Leave the disputed sectors or face the consequences. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez knocked on his door and entered when he called out, The young officer had served under Jake for 3 years and knew him well enough to recognize when something was wrong. "Sir, you look troubled." Jake handed her the message pad. Amy's face grew pale as she read the ultimatum. "They're giving us 72 hours to begin evacuation of all outer colonies," she said. "That's impossible. We have over 2 million civilians in those systems." "I know," Jake replied quietly. He stood and walked to the window that looked out over New Denver's Main Street. Children played in the park while their parents worked in the shops and offices nearby. This world had been their home for 50 years. "Sir, what are our orders?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. His grandfather had been a soldier during the last Great War, back when humans fought with weapons that could crack planets and fleets that darkened the stars. The old man had told him stories that most people preferred to forget. "Get me a secure line to Earth Command," Jake said finally. "Priority Alpha clearance." "Yes, sir." "What should I tell them?" "Tell them the hegemony coalition has just made a very big mistake." Jake turned back to his desk and began typing orders on his computer. "And Amy, start sending recall notices to all our deep space survey teams." Amy looked confused. The survey teams were supposed to be mapping new star systems for future colonies. They were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. "All of them, sir? Even the ones on extended missions beyond the Outer Rim?" "Every single one," Jake confirmed. "Use the old military codes, the ones from the emergency protocols." As Amy hurried to carry out his orders, Jake opened a secure channel to Admiral Sarah Mitchell at Earth Command. The conversation was brief, but intense. "Sarah, they've given us an ultimatum," he said. 72 hours. "Understood, Jake. How many civilian evacuations do you need?" "At least 40 planets, maybe more." "And Sarah?" "They mentioned military action if we don't comply." There was a long pause on the other end of the transmission. When Admiral Mitchell spoke again, her voice was cold as space itself. "Jake, start the evacuations immediately. Get our people to safety. And after that, we remind the galaxy why they asked us to limit our military in the first place." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone in his office. Outside, the children continued playing in the park, unaware that their peaceful world was about to change forever. In the distance, the first evacuation ships were already lifting off, carrying families to safety deeper in human space. But not everyone would make it out in time. 3 weeks passed, and the hegemony fleet arrived at Haven's Rest like a storm made of metal and fire. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the green and blue planet grow larger on his screens. The agricultural world below was home to over 2 million human colonists. "Admiral, we are in position," reported his tactical officer. "All ships ready for orbital bombardment." Kethvar nodded with satisfaction. His fleet consisted of 42 warships, including 6 heavy cruisers capable of turning continents to ash. Against this force, the humans had only a handful of outdated patrol ships and some ancient orbital defense platforms. "Open a channel to the planet's surface," he ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Governor Lisa Parker. The human woman sat calmly in what appeared to be an emergency command center, surrounded by her senior staff. Despite facing overwhelming odds, she showed no fear. "Governor Parker," Kethvar began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "By order of the Galactic Council, you have 1 standard hour to begin full evacuation of this planet. Any delay will be seen as an act of rebellion." Lisa's face remained calm, but her eyes were steel. "Admiral Kethvar, Haven's Rest is a legally established colony under galactic law. We have done nothing wrong. You have built settlements in territory claimed by the Hegemony Coalition. This is your final warning." The transmission ended, leaving Lisa alone with her command staff. Colonel Ben Adams, her security chief and a former Earth Marine, stepped forward with a damage report. "Ma'am, we've got most of the children and elderly loaded onto the first wave of transport ships, but we need at least 6 more hours to evacuate everyone." Lisa looked at the tactical display showing the enemy fleet in orbit. Every instinct told her to surrender and save lives. But she also knew what would happen to the other human colonies if they gave in to threats. How long can our defenses hold? she asked. Maybe an hour if we're lucky, replied Captain Ryan Clark, commander of the small human defense squadron. His ships were old but well maintained, and his crews were skilled. My destroyers can hurt them, but not enough to win. Lisa made her decision. Then we buy our people 6 hours. All defense platforms prepare for battle. Captain Clark, your ships are authorized to engage. The battle for Haven's Rest began when the human orbital platforms opened fire. Their weapons were decades behind galactic standards, but they were positioned well and crewed by people fighting for their homes. The first salvo caught 2 hegemony cruisers by surprise, damaging their shields and forcing them to fall back. Captain Clark led his 4 destroyers in a desperate charge against the enemy line. The USS Liberty, his flagship, was built during the last war and still carried some of humanity's most dangerous weapons. Her nuclear torpedoes struck the hegemony formation like hammers, destroying 2 ships outright. "Direct hit on the Devastator," shouted his weapons officer. "She's breaking apart." But the hegemony had too many ships. For every enemy vessel the humans destroyed, 3 more took its place. One by one, the orbital platforms fell silent. Clark's destroyers fought like cornered wolves, but eventually even the Liberty was overwhelmed by enemy fire. Admiral Kethvar watched the last human ship explode in a burst of flame and debris. The battle had lasted exactly 1 hour, just as his tactical computers had predicted. Now the planet below lay defenseless. "Sir, we're receiving evacuation requests from the surface," reported his communications officer. "They're asking for more time to get their people to safety." "Denied," Kethvar said coldly. They had their warning. "Begin orbital bombardment. Target all major population centers." The hegemony fleet opened fire with weapons designed to kill planets. Beams of pure energy struck Haven's Rest like the fists of angry gods, turning cities to vapor and forests to ash. The beautiful agricultural world that had fed dozens of star systems disappeared under a blanket of nuclear fire. In the space beyond Haven's Rest, hidden in the shadow of a dead asteroid, Lieutenant Commander Alex Stone watched the massacre through the sensors of his scout ship Ranger. The small vessel was officially listed as a survey craft, but Stone knew better. Like many of humanity's civilian ships, the Ranger carried sophisticated spy equipment. Stone recorded everything: the one-sided battle, the desperate defense, and the final moments of Haven's Rest as it burned beneath enemy weapons. When the bombardment finally ended, over 2 million human civilians were dead. "My God," whispered his navigator, Ensign Katie Walsh. "They killed everyone." "Not everyone," Stone replied grimly. He was already plotting a course back to Earth, carrying evidence of the greatest war crime in galactic history. "Send a message to Earth Command. Priority Alpha. Tell them Haven's Rest is gone." Back on Earth, President Maria Santos received the news in the deep bunkers beneath the Capitol. The secure conference room fell completely silent as Stone's footage played on the main screens. They watched the green world of Haven's Rest transform into a ball of fire and radiation. General Peter Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was the first to speak. "Ma'am, this changes everything. The Galactic Council has authorized genocide." "How many ships do we have ready for deployment?" President Santos asked quietly. "If we activate the reserve fleets and call back all deep space assets, maybe 300 vessels. But ma'am, that's not enough to fight the entire hegemony coalition." President Santos stood and walked to the massive star map that covered one wall of the bunker. For 300 years, humanity had honored the Treaty of Distant Stars. They had kept their military small and avoided conflicts with other species. They had been the galaxy's good neighbors. "General Hayes, what is Protocol 7? Hayes straightened in his chair. Protocol 7 was classified at the highest levels, known only to the President and the senior military leadership. Protocol 7 authorizes the activation of all hidden military assets and the recall of all deep cover operatives, he said carefully. It also removes all restrictions on weapon development and deployment, including the ones we agreed to. "In the treaty?" "Yes, ma'am. All restrictions." President Santos turned back to face her advisors. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone in the room heard every word clearly. Activate Protocol 7. Send the authorization codes to all fleet commanders. And General? Yes, ma'am. Send a message to Admiral Mitchell. Tell her the gloves are off. Across human space, ancient communication systems came to life for the first time in 3 centuries. Ships that had been disguised as merchant vessels received new orders and began to shed their false identities. Military bases hidden inside asteroids powered up their weapon systems, and in the deepest vaults on Earth, weapons that had been locked away since the last Great War began to hum with deadly energy. The galaxy had made humanity angry. Now they would learn why that was a mistake. Elder Vashati had tried to warn them, but nobody had listened. The ancient laws existed for a reason, written in the ashes of worlds that had made the same error long ago. Now that lesson would be taught again, and the price would be paid in blood. The war was about to begin. The Hegemony Coalition celebrated their victory with great feasts and parades on their capital world of Nexus Prime. Admiral Kethvar was hailed as a hero who had solved the human problem with swift, decisive action. The other council races sent messages of congratulations, praising the coalition for their strength and wisdom. Ambassador Zektar stood before cheering crowds, his chitinous shell polished to a mirror shine. The galaxy is safer today, he declared. We have shown that the Hegemony Coalition will not tolerate aggression from lesser species. But in the depths of space, far from the celebrating crowds, something was stirring. The first sign came when the Hegemony patrol ship Subjugator failed to report in from the frontier sector. The heavy cruiser had been escorting a supply convoy through what should have been safe space. When rescue ships arrived at its last known position, they found only twisted wreckage floating in the void. Burned into the surface of a nearby asteroid, in letters 10 meters tall, was a message in human script. Remember Haven's Rest. Captain Kate Sullivan watched the Hegemony search ships through the sensors of her stealth vessel, the Wraith. The Earth Navy ship was officially listed as destroyed 3 months ago, but like many human vessels, death had been greatly exaggerated. Captain, the last of the escape pods has been picked up, reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Danny Moore. All 37 Hegemony personnel are safe. Kate nodded with satisfaction. The mining station they had just destroyed was completely uninhabited now. Its crew evacuated to safety before the charges detonated. Unlike their enemies, humans still followed the rules of war. Good work, Danny. Set course for our next target. She paused, looking at the tactical display. And Danny? Make sure they know we were here. Similar scenes played out across Hegemony space. Ships that had been thought lost, destroyed, or decommissioned suddenly reappeared like ghosts from humanity's past. The merchant vessel Mary's Dream revealed her true identity as a missile cruiser when she eliminated 3 Hegemony outposts in a single night. The research ship Discovery, supposedly studying cosmic radiation, unveiled hidden weapon systems and systematically dismantled an entire fleet base. What the aliens had assumed were scattered civilian ships were actually the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Nicole Brooks stood on the bridge of the Discovery as her crew prepared for their next mission. The ship looked like a peaceful science vessel from the outside, but appearances could be deceiving. Nicole, this is Admiral Mitchell, came a voice over the secure communication channel. How are your people holding up? We're angry, Sarah, Nicole replied simply, but we're focused. Every one of my crew lost friends or family at Haven's Rest. We won't make the same mistakes the Hegemony did. Good. Remember, we're not here for revenge. We're here to end this war and make sure it never happens again. The Hegemony Military Command tried desperately to understand what was happening. Their forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. How many human ships are there? Demanded General Vorth, the Coalition's supreme military commander. Our original intelligence. Estimated 50 vessels maximum, replied his aide nervously. But we've now confirmed attacks by over 200 different human ships. Impossible. Where were they hiding? The aide brought up a holographic display showing recent battle zones. Sir, many of these vessels were reported destroyed in previous conflicts. Others were listed as merchant ships or research vessels. It appears the humans have been hiding their true military strength for decades. On Earth, Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the command center, buried deep beneath the planet's surface. Holographic displays showed the progress of human forces across the galaxy. Every operation was planned with surgical precision, every target carefully chosen. Admiral, the Wraith has successfully destroyed the hegemony fuel depot in the Vega system, reported Colonel James Parker, her chief of staff. Captain Sullivan reports 0 civilian casualties. Excellent. What about the Phantom, Commander? Stevens hit 3 supply convoys in the past 6 hours. Again, all enemy personnel were safely evacuated before the ships were destroyed. Sarah nodded with grim satisfaction. The humans were fighting a different kind of war than their enemies expected. Where the hegemony had killed millions of civilians without hesitation, human forces went to extraordinary lengths to avoid unnecessary deaths. But they were still destroying the enemy's ability to fight. Captain Tony Rivera commanded the assault, carrier Leviathan, a ship so large it had its own gravity generators and docking bays for 100 smaller vessels. The Leviathan had been hidden inside the asteroid belt around Earth's sun, disguised as a mining operation. Captain, we're receiving new orders from Earth Command, reported his executive officer, Commander Linda Hayes. Tony read the message and felt his blood run cold. All hands, this is the captain. Set course for Nexus Prime, maximum speed, battle stations. The Leviathan emerged from its hiding place like a metal mountain come to life. At 5 kilometers long and carrying 5,000 human marines, it was designed for one purpose: planetary assault. Across human space, other sleeping giants were awakening. The dreadnought Retribution shed its disguise as an orbital factory and powered up weapons that could crack continents. Her sister ships Vengeance, Righteous Fury, and Iron Will followed suit, their massive forms blotting out the stars. These were not the small patrol ships and defense platforms that had fought at Haven's Rest. These were the weapons of humanity's last great war, hidden away and maintained in secret for 3 centuries. Back on Nexus Prime, Admiral Kithvar received increasingly desperate reports from across hegemony space. Military bases destroyed, supply lines cut, entire fleets vanishing without a trace. Sir, we need to recall our forces and consolidate our defenses, urged his tactical advisor. The humans are picking us apart piece by piece. Kethvar's mandibles clicked with frustrated anger. This was supposed to be a simple police action. How did soft, peaceful humans become so dangerous? His question was answered when a new report arrived from the frontier. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet moving toward Nexus Prime. At its head was a ship that made even the largest hegemony dreadnoughts look small. Sir, it's the humans, whispered his communications officer. They're coming here. Elder Vashti, awakening from her meditation in the crystal caves of her homeworld, felt the disturbance in space-time that meant great fleets were moving. She had hoped never to feel that sensation again. The young fools, she whispered to herself. They have awakened the sleeping dragon. In the depths of space, Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of humanity's most powerful warship, the battlecruiser Nemesis. Around her sailed a fleet that had been built in secret over 3 centuries of supposed peace. Admiral, will reach Nexus Prime in 18 hours, reported her navigator. Sarah looked at the tactical display showing enemy positions throughout the system. The hegemony had concentrated their remaining forces around their capital world, preparing for a final battle. Signal all ships, she ordered. This ends now. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had been asked to limit their military after the last war. They were about to discover what happened when humanity finally took off the gloves and showed their true strength. The beast was fully awake now, and it was coming for those who had dared to hurt its children. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered in panic, their holographic displays showing the devastation spreading through hegemony space like wildfire. Elder Vashiti floated into the chamber, her crystalline form pulsing with urgent light. "What have you done?" she demanded, her ancient voice echoing off the walls. Ambassador Zektar tried to maintain his composure, but his shell had lost its shine, and several of his legs trembled with fear. "Elder, surely you can see that we had no choice. The humans were expanding into our territory." "Your territory?" Vashti's laugh was like crystal breaking. "You young fool, you understand nothing." The main display showed the latest battle reports. 47 hegemony military installations destroyed in 2 weeks. 3 entire fleet groups eliminated without a trace. The mighty coalition military, which had ruled this sector for centuries, was being systematically dismantled. "This is impossible," muttered Representative Qualm of the Trade Federation. "Our intelligence said the humans only had a few dozen ships." "Your intelligence," came a calm voice from the chamber entrance, "was exactly what we wanted you to believe." Every head in the eye room turned as Admiral Sarah Mitchell walked through the massive doors. Behind her marched 200 human Marines in gleaming power armor, their weapons held ready but not aimed at anyone. The armor bore scorch marks and battle damage from recent conflicts. Sarah moved to the center of the chamber with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a battle. Her uniform was crisp and clean, but her eyes held the cold fire of controlled fury. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted entities," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast room. "You have made a terrible mistake." She activated a holographic projector, and suddenly the chamber filled with images of humanity's true military strength. Massive shipyards hidden behind Earth's moon, where vessels the size of small cities were under construction. Fleet bases carved into asteroids invisible to conventional sensors. And most shocking of all, the enormous forms of humanity's actual warships. "For 300 years, we honored the Treaty of Distant Stars," Sarah continued. "We kept our fleet small, our expansion limited, our military presence minimal. We did this not out of weakness but out of respect for the peace our ancestors died to create." The display changed to show the dreadnought Retribution sliding out from behind Jupiter, its 3-kilometer hull bristling with weapons. It was followed by its sister ships Vengeance, Iron Will, and Righteous Fury. Each vessel carried enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. "You see, the treaty was never about limiting our ability to build ships," Sarah explained with a cold smile. "It was about limiting how many we kept active at any given time. The rest we simply mothballed." Commander Ralk of the Predator caste found his voice first. "This is trickery, deception." "No," Sarah replied calmly. "This is what happens when you force a peaceful species to defend itself. You wanted to see what humans do when we're truly angry? Now you're going to find out." The holographic display shifted to show real-time images from across the galaxy. The assault carrier Leviathan had reached the outer system of Nexus Prime and was deploying its forces. Smaller carriers followed, each one disgorging hundreds of attack craft and transport ships. Admiral Kethvar, watching from his command bunker on Nexus Prime's surface, felt his confidence crumble like a house built on sand. The human fleet that approached his world was beyond his worst nightmares. "Sir, they're requesting our surrender," reported his communications officer. "Denied," Kethvar snarled. "We have the largest defensive fleet in the galaxy. We will not bow to these upstart humans." But as he spoke, long-range sensors brought disturbing news. The approaching human fleet wasn't just large, it was impossibly advanced. Their ships moved with precision that suggested computer control beyond anything the hegemony possessed. Their formations were perfect, their coordination flawless. General Patricia Kane stood on the bridge of the assault ship Thunder, watching as her landing craft prepared for deployment. The veteran Marine had fought in border conflicts throughout her career, but never anything like this. "General, we have confirmation from orbital reconnaissance," reported her aide, Major Robert Chen. "The hegemony has concentrated their remaining forces around the capital city. Estimated strength, 200,000 troops." Patricia nodded grimly. "And civilian population?" "Approximately 50 million in the greater metropolitan area." "Then we do this clean. No orbital bombardment, no area weapons. We go in precise and surgical." Patricia's voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through years of careful leadership. We're not them, people. We don't kill civilians to make a point. The invasion of Nexus Prime began at dawn, local time. But instead of the brutal assault the defenders expected, the humans did something unprecedented. They announced their targets in advance. "Attention, hegemony forces," came the broadcast on all military frequencies. "This is General Kane of the FARS, Earth Marine Corps. We will be conducting precision strikes on the following military installations." A list of targets followed, down to specific buildings and equipment. All civilian areas will be avoided. Evacuation corridors will be maintained for non-combatants. Any hegemony personnel who wish to surrender will be treated according to the standard rules of war. Admiral Kevin Thompson, commanding the orbital fleet, watched as his ships took position around the planet. Unlike the indiscriminate bombardment that had destroyed Haven's Rest, every shot his vessels fired was carefully calculated. "Target the military command center, main building only," he ordered. "Ensure the civilian hospital next door is undamaged." The battle for Nexus Prime became a textbook example of precision warfare. Human Marines advanced block by block through the capital city, their powered armor protecting them from enemy fire, while allowing them to avoid harming civilians. Sergeant Lucy Davis, a survivor of Haven's Rest whose family had died in the bombardment, found herself outside Admiral Kethvar's personal bunker. The same being who had ordered the death of over 2 million civilians was now cowering behind reinforced walls, pleading for mercy through his intercom. "Please," came Kethvar's voice through the speaker. "I surrender. I was only following orders." Major Carlos Mendez, Lucy's commanding officer, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder as she prepared the breaching charges. "We're not them, Sergeant," he said quietly. Lucy's face was wet with tears, but her voice was steady. "I know, sir. That's what makes us better." The door exploded inward, and Lucy stepped through the smoke to find the alien admiral curled in a corner of his luxurious office. The being who had shown no mercy to human civilians now begged for the compassion he had never offered others. "Admiral Kethvar," Lucy said formally, "you are under arrest for war crimes. You have the right to legal representation under galactic law." The siege lasted exactly 72 hours, the same amount of time the hegemony had given human civilians to evacuate Haven's Rest. But unlike the massacre that had started this war, the human victory was achieved with minimal civilian casualties. When the hegemony coalition formally surrendered, it was to an enemy that had proven itself superior in every way that mattered. The humans had been stronger, faster, and more advanced. But most importantly, they had been better. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, Elder Vashati addressed the assembled representatives one final time before entering her species' traditional hibernation. "The old law exists for a reason," she said, her crystalline form beginning to dim with approaching sleep. "Humans do not seek war, but when war finds them, they do not merely fight, they excel. They do not merely win, they transform everything. They touch." She paused, her ancient eyes looking at each representative in turn. "Today you learned why the galaxy's oldest law exists. Never make humans angry. Not because they will destroy you in their rage, but because they will remake you in their righteousness." Admiral Sarah Mitchell stepped forward to address the council. "The hegemony coalition will be disbanded, its military assets destroyed or redistributed. But its people will not be enslaved or executed. They will be given the chance to build something better." "What about the rest of us?" asked Representative Qualm nervously. Sarah's smile was warmer now, though still touched with steel. "The galaxy will have new rules. Aggressive expansion is forbidden. Attacks on civilian targets are punishable by immediate intervention. And genocide," she paused meaningfully, "becomes not just a crime, but an impossibility." "Who will enforce these rules?" demanded Commander Ralk. Sarah gestured to the stars visible through the chamber's transparent dome. Out there, human ships were already taking position throughout the galaxy, their crews ready to respond to any threat. "We will," she said simply, "because that's what happens when you make humans angry. We don't just fight back, we make sure it never happens again." 6 months after the surrender of Nexus Prime, the galaxy looked very different. Human ships patrolled trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for centuries. Former hegemony worlds received aid packages and medical supplies instead of tribute, demands. The great shipyards that had once built weapons of conquest now constructed hospitals and schools. President Maria Santos, now serving as humanity's first Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council, stood before the rebuilt chamber on the neutral world of Haven Station. The station had been constructed in orbit around the ruins of Haven's Rest, a memorial to the civilians who had died there. The new Galactic Compact has been signed by all member species, she announced to the assembled representatives. Aggressive expansion is now forbidden under penalty of immediate intervention. All civilian populations are protected by absolute law, enforced by joint peacekeeping forces. The changes went deeper than just new laws. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together on projects that benefited everyone. The hegemony's former mining worlds now produced materials for schools and medical centers instead of warships. The Predator caste's military expertise was redirected toward disaster relief and emergency response. Admiral Jake Morrison, promoted after his heroic defense coordination during the evacuation of the outer colonies, now commanded the new Galactic Peacekeeping Force. From his flagship, the rebuilt Liberty, the ship bore the same name as the destroyer that had died defending Haven's Rest, but it was built for a different purpose. Admiral, we're receiving a distress call from the Centauri sector, reported his aide, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had remained by his side throughout the war and its aftermath. What's the situation? Jake asked, rising from his captain's chair. Asteroid impact on a mining world. The local government is requesting immediate assistance with evacuation and rescue operations. Jake nodded. Signal the fleet. Set course for Centauri maximum speed. And Amy, alert the medical ships. We'll need them. This was the new reality of galactic politics. Instead of fleets gathering for conquest, they assembled for rescue missions. Instead of weapons aimed at defenseless worlds, ships carried supplies for those in need. On the surface of former hegemony worlds, the changes were even more dramatic. Commander Nicole Brooks, now serving as military advisor to the planetary reconstruction effort on Kepler-7, watched as human engineers worked alongside former enemies to rebuild cities destroyed in the war. It's amazing, said her hegemony counterpart, a young officer named Veltar whose shell still bore the scars of battle. 6 months ago we were shooting at each other. Now my people and yours work side by side. Nicole smiled as she watched a group of human children playing with young hegemony, offspring in a newly constructed park. That's what happens when you stop fighting over territory and start building a future together. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some species struggled to accept the new order, particularly those who had profited from the old system of constant warfare and exploitation. But they quickly learned that the humans meant what they said about enforcing the peace. Captain Kate Sullivan, now commanding the patrol ship New Horizons, intercepted a group of raiders attacking a peaceful trade convoy near the edge of known space. The criminals had assumed that the collapse of the old military structure meant they could operate freely. They were wrong. This is Captain Sullivan of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, she broadcast to the raider ships. You are in violation of the Galactic Compact. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. The raiders, confident in their superior numbers, opened fire instead. It was a mistake they didn't live to regret. The New Horizons was built with technology that made the old hegemony ships look like toys. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes. But even in victory, the humans showed restraint. The raider crews were arrested, not executed. Their ships were confiscated and converted into rescue vessels, and the trade convoy continued on its way, protected by an escort that would ensure safe passage. Elder Vashti had awakened from her hibernation to see the changes for herself. The ancient being toured the memorial gardens on Haven Station, where holographic displays told the story of the civilians who had died there. It's beautiful, she said to Admiral Sarah Mitchell, who had personally requested the elder's presence. From such tragedy you have built hope. Sarah nodded, looking out at the stars through the station's massive viewports. That's what we do. We take the worst things that happen to us and use them to make sure they never happen to anyone else. The memorial was more than just a monument to the dead. It was a training center for peacekeepers from across the galaxy, where beings from dozens of different species learned to work together. The lesson was simple but profound. The cost of hatred was too high for any civilization to afford. General Patricia Kane, now serving as director of the Peacekeeping Academy, addressed a new class of recruits. The group included former hegemony, soldiers, predator caste warriors, and representatives from nearly every major species in the galaxy. You are here, she told them, because someone you loved was hurt by war. Maybe it was at Haven's Rest, maybe it was somewhere else in some other conflict, but all of you understand that the price of peace is constant vigilance. Among the recruits sat Veltar, the young hegemony officer who had fought against the humans during the war. His presence was a symbol of how much the galaxy had changed. "Ma'am?" he asked during the question period. "How do we know that other species won't make the same mistake the hegemony made? How do we prevent another Haven's Rest?" Patricia's answer was simple but powerful. "Because now you know what happens when you make humans angry. And more importantly, you've seen what we do with that anger." She gestured to the holographic displays showing peacekeeping operations across the galaxy. Human ships working with former enemies to stop natural disasters, mixed crews of different species patrolling trade routes together, medical teams providing aid to worlds that had never seen advanced healthcare. "We could have used our anger to conquer the galaxy," Patricia continued. "We had the power. We had the justification. Instead, we used it to build something better." The lesson resonated throughout known space. Species that had been preparing for war instead found themselves invited to join construction projects. Weapons factories were converted to produce farming equipment and medical supplies. Military academies became universities focused on peaceful cooperation. But the humans never forgot that their strength came from being ready for war while choosing peace. The great fleets remained hidden but ready, their crews training constantly for threats that might never come. The terrible weapons of the last great war stayed locked in their vaults, a reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. Captain Tony Rivera, now commanding the peacekeeping vessel Enterprise, received a message from Earth Command as his ship patrolled the Outer Rim territories. "Tony, this is Admiral Mitchell. We've received intelligence about possible pirate activity in your sector. How are your people doing?" Tony looked around his bridge where human and alien crew members worked side by side with the easy cooperation that had become the hallmark of the new galactic order. "We're ready, Sarah. Whatever comes, we're ready." And they were. The galaxy had learned its lesson well. The old law that Elder Vashati had tried to teach them was now written into every treaty, carved into every memorial, and taught to every child from 100 different worlds. Never make humans angry. Not because they will destroy you in their fury, but because they will use that fury to remake the entire galaxy in the image of justice. The stars shone peacefully over worlds that had once known only war and fear. Children of a dozen species played together in parks built on former battlefields. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, human ships kept their silent watch, ready to respond to any threat that might disturb the peace their sacrifice had made possible. The galaxy was safe now, not because humans ruled it, but because they protected it. And as long as humanity remembered the price paid at Haven's Rest, it would remain safe forever. The law remained unchanged, carved in starlight, and sealed with blood: never make humans angry. But now everyone understood why.